We need to take some time and go through the OSHA manual. It's also called the Code of Federal Regulations. The first thing I want to do is talk about how the manual is organized, since it is really more important to understand where to find information and how to use the book than it is to memorize individual pieces of information. If you look at the table of contents, you might get an idea that each chapter addresses a specific aspect of construction. For instance, subpart P, subpart by the way is just a fancy word for chapter. Subpart P is about excavation, subpart X is about stairways and so forth. So each chapter addresses a different aspect of construction. Another very important thing that I want you to realize is that it does have a very good index in this book, and I want you to make sure you find it, and you may want to tab it. In many of these OSHA manuals, the index is not in the very back of the book. For some reason, they added some information, but they decided to put that information behind the index. So it was probably one of the worst things for people that were taking a test, because if you looked for the index, you may think that there isn't one, but it's got a great index. There are many different versions and editions of this book. So when I do this video, I won't be showing you a book, and I'm going to try not to call out page numbers because you may be on a totally different page than me. I'm going to call out paragraph numbers. I'm going to call out chapter numbers and paragraph and what they call section numbers. Each paragraph has a number associated with it, so I'll be calling those out. Now there is almost every single one of those will relate. Whatever I'm calling out, you'll be able to find in your book because they don't change. There's only a few exceptions, and as we get to those, I'll point those out to you. One of the first questions you want to ask yourself is, how do I know the question will come out of this book? Well, it's pretty obvious it's a safety question. You know, they're going to ask you about cave-in protection. They're going to ask you about ladders and what the angle of the ladder is. Somebody sometime may ask you about, you know, eye and face protection and what the rules are regarding those. I think we all know that it's fairly obvious that all those types of issues are safety questions. So you may you should be able to pull it out as, you know, identify it as a safety question without a problem. All right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to start on, once again, make sure that you can find the table of contents, and we're going to start highlighting what they call subpart C, chapter C. At any time when you're having a problem keeping up with me, just simply hit the pause button. I'm going to try to have this section number on the screen, so you'll be able to hit the pause button and be able to find it and then hit the play button again. Subpart C is about general safety and health provisions. This is chapter C, and I want you to highlight the second paragraph in that subpart. Whose responsibility is it to prevent accidents? Well, it says it shall be the responsibility of the employer, of course, to initiate and maintain such programs as may be necessary to comply with this part. Now, there are a lot of definitions. This is they're kind of getting us started here, and so they're giving us a lot of definitions. In paragraph 32C, they mention what approved means, so you might want to take a look at that. In paragraph 32D, they talk about an authorized person. In paragraph 32F, OSHA defines what a competent person is. And then in 32M, they define what a qualified person is. So if you get any questions about, you know, what do they mean by a qualified person? What is the definition of a qualified person? Well, there it is right there in subpart C. Let's go to subpart D. Subpart D, chapter D, once again, is all about occupational health and environmental controls. This is kind of general stuff on the job site. It is in chapter. We're going to start highlighting in paragraph 1926-50C, and that paragraph talks about if there's no hospital close by, that there should be a person with first aid certificate available on the job site. We're going to go a couple lines down and it'll talk about the first aid kit. Paragraph 50D2 talks about how the first aid kit has to be checked weekly and before being sent out on each job. Table D1 discusses how many toilets should be on the job site. Based on the number of employees, there shall be a certain number of toilets. And then the paragraph just after that, paragraph C2, says under temporary conditions, provision shall be made so that not less than one toilet facility is available. Let's find table D2. We're still in subpart D, so you shouldn't have to go far to find this. Paragraph 50D2, I'm sorry, table 50D2. This is table 50D2. Says permissible noise exposures. It tells us on the left-hand side there is a duration, so that's the number of hours. On the right-hand column, that's the decibel level. So you've got a decibel level, and at that noise at that decibel level, somebody can be exposed to at the corresponding number of hours before they need hearing protection. And then paragraph 52E discusses exposure to impulsive or impact noise, and that's and it should not exceed 140 peak decibels. Now you'll jump back probably 10 pages or so. You'll go about 10 pages further in the book, and you'll find a table D3, which discusses illumination. The left-hand column tells you how much light you need. The right-hand column is the corresponding types of construction in areas on the job site. So you might want to take a minute and look at that. Now, we're still in subpart D, but it's going to be a pretty good ways further back in that chapter, so you might need to hit the pause button to find paragraph 62C. There's a discussion there of exposure to lead, and that the maximum lead exposure is 50 micrograms per cubic meter of air. That's the permissible exposure limit, they call it. That's in bold print, by the way, so that makes it a little easier to find. But it's paragraph 62C. The next thing I want you to do is jump to the back of that same subpart. We're still in subpart D, and we're going to be talking about occupational and environmental controls once again, but this is about protective gear. So take a minute. Once again, you might need to hit the pause button to find this. This is going to be kind of tough for you to find. It's Appendix B to 1926.65. It's in bold print, and that's the best way I can tell you to try to find it. Because if I give you a page number, you may be on a totally different book than I have. So take a look, and it is towards the back of subpart D, of course, because it's an appendix. Excuse me, to subpart D. And there's a discussion of protective gear. And if you can find that, it'll talk about a level A, a level B, C, and D. And a level A is to be used. It'll tell us when the highest level of protection is needed, and a level B and a level C, and so forth. So there you go. Make sure you can find that. Alright, that's going to do it for subpart or chapter D. We're going to go to subpart E, where we're talking about personal protective and life-saving equipment. And it says in paragraph 1926-100A that employees working in areas where there is a possibility of some type of injury from a falling object, they shall be protective with protective helmets. Drop down 4 or 5 paragraphs. It's going to be in section 102A, eye and face protection. You know, employees have to be provided with eye and face protection equipment when machines or operations present potential eye or face injury. There you go. Let's go to the table. There's a table close by called table E2, where you'll have a bunch of diagrams of your different face and eye protection. So take a look at them, and there's a list of what they're called there. So you might want to take a minute and get familiar with that. Let's go down to table E2. Table E2 discusses a welding and cutting operation and what filter lens shade you need. For instance, if you look on that table, it'll tell us if you're doing carbon arc welding, then you'll need shade number 14. Let's go to section 104C. We'll be talking about lifelines. Now the interesting thing is there's several pages that you got to get through, and you're going to go all the way to the back of that chapter. This is the last page on that chapter. Paragraph 10C says lifelines used on rock scaling operations or in areas where the lifeline may be subjected to cutting or abrasion, they shall be a minimum of 7/8 inch wire core manila. Now for other lifeline operations, you can have a minimum of 3/4 inch manila or equivalent. Now, and also has to have a breaking strength of 5,400 pounds. So there you go. Let's go to section 105A, where there's a discussion of safety nets. Safety nets shall be provided when workplaces are more than 25 feet above the ground, or water or other surfaces where the use of ladders, scaffolds, catch platforms, temporary floors, safety lines, or safety belts is impractical. If you skip a paragraph, it's paragraph 105C1, and it says that those nets need to extend 8 feet beyond the edge of the work. There you go. Skip a couple paragraphs. The mesh size, 105D, okay, shall not exceed 6 inches by 6 inches, and your edge ropes shall have a minimum breaking strength of 5,000 pounds. That's the last sentence in that same paragraph. Section 106 talks about working over water. Paragraph A, 106A says, yep, they got to have that life jacket. 106B, I don't have it on the screen here, but 106B says they have to be inspected every day. 106C says you got to have a ring buoy with 90 feet of line, and then 106D says you have to have at least one life-saving skiff. I tell you, this is important for general builder residential guys, but if you're taking the marine test, you better have that page tabbed, no doubt. You'll know you'll get 2 or 3 questions off of that page if you're taking the marine contractor's test. Okie doke, let's look at subpart F, which is about fire protection and prevention. On paragraph 150C, in bold print, it says portable firefighting equipment. Fire extinguishers and small hose lines. A fire extinguisher rated not less than 2A shall be provided for each 3,000 square feet of the protected building area, or major fraction thereof, and your travel distance from any point of the protected area to the nearest fire extinguisher shall not exceed 100 feet. The next paragraph may sound kind of silly to you, but we're actually told that you could have a 55-gallon open drum of water with 2 fire pails can be substituted for a fire extinguisher having a 2A rating. Wow, sounds like Old West, doesn't it? There you go. Let's drop down about 4 paragraphs. We're still talking about fire protection and prevention, of course. The paragraph is 150C1, Roman numeral 6. We're only about 3 or 4 paragraphs down from where we just highlighted. You got to have a fire extinguisher rated not less than 10B provided within 50 feet of wherever more than 5 gallons of flammable or combustible liquids or 5 pounds of flammable gas are being used on the job site. We're told that this requirement does not apply to integral fuel tanks of motor vehicles. Skip a paragraph. This is Roman numeral 8. Portable fire extinguishers shall be inspected periodically and maintained in accordance with the maintenance and use of portable fire extinguishers, NEFPA 10A 1970. Sometimes I'll just pull out these little numbers that you would never be able to remember, and you just got to find those. Okay, let's look at subpart F still. We're still talking about fire protection and prevention, and we're going to flip over a page or so to section 152A2. And paragraph A2 says that flammable or combustible liquids shall not be stored in areas used for exits, stairways, or normally used for the safe passage of people. The very next paragraph talks about indoor storage of flammable and combustible liquids. Not more than 25 gallons of flammable or combustible liquids shall be stored in a room outside of an approved storage cabinet. For storage of liquefied petroleum gas, you got to go to another section there. Okay, that's subpart F. Subpart G in the OSHA manual is about signs, signals, and barricades. Alright, the first thing I want you to look at should be on the first page of Subpart G, where we're told that in figure G1 there's letter colors. A danger sign should have the letters in white, the back, there should be red around the danger, and then the background be in black. Okay, so that's one way to do it, figure G1. You want to make sure that you can find this. If I was going to be taking an underground test, I would pay special attention to subpart G. It's also important for general builder and residential contractors, but especially underground contractors. This is big. Let's go to paragraph 200I. It says in bold print, additional rules. We're basically told that you have rules in this book, and you also have ANSI standards. And what ANSI tells us, the American National Standards Institute, also apply for OSHA rules as well. So you can read that paragraph on your own, but that's basically what you're going to take away from that paragraph. The next thing we're going to talk about is in paragraph 202, which is barricades. Barricades for the protection of employees shall conform to what? Part 6 of the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. You know, these are the types of individual pieces of information that you may be responsible for one particular day of your life. Let's go to subpart H, where we're discussing materials handling and storage, use, and disposal. We're going to highlight first of all in paragraph 250B, material storage. Materials stored inside buildings under construction shall not be placed within 6 feet of any hoistway or inside a floor opening, or within 10 feet of an exterior wall which does not extend above the top of the materials stored. Drop down about 4 paragraphs or so, and we're going to talk about stacking brick. Alright, bricks stacks shall not be more than 7 feet in height. When a loose brick stack reaches a height of 4 feet, it shall be tapered back 2 inches in every foot of height above the 4-foot level. The next paragraph talks about stack and block, so make sure that you can find that. Stack and block, okay, if a block is stacked higher than 6 feet, the stack shall be tapered back 1/2 block per tier above the 6-foot level. Make sure you can find that. Those two are together. That second one is not on the screen, but that is just one paragraph below the one that is on the screen. You have stack and brick, and you have stack and block, and it's under materials handling and storage. This chapter is a little tricky because you may think, hey, I'm going to go to the masonry chapter for this. Well, there's a materials handling section as well. If you can't find it where you're looking in a particular question, it may, or an answer, it may be in subpart H where they're telling us how to store materials. We're going to go to a table now. Flip over a page or two and see if you can find table H16. I'm actually going to flip over more than a page or two, probably 4 or 5. We're talking about nylon rope slings here on table H16. And I want you to highlight this. Follow your left-hand column down to a 1-inch rope. If your rope is 1 inch and you are using an endless sling, so look up there where it says endless, and you are using a basket hitch, your angle of rope to horizontal is 60 degrees, then you can lift 8,200 pounds with that particular sling. Alright, so it's you may not actually understand exactly what they're talking about here, but guess what? If you can pull the number off the table, you're going to have a smile on your face at the end of the day. Let's go to section 252. Now we're still talking about materials handling. This is a tough little piece of information to find because there's a demolition chapter, and the demolition chapter talks about using chutes and that type of thing. But there's also a little blurb here in disposal of waste materials. Section 252, and you can just go ahead and read all that. I'll kind of summarize it for you. In paragraph A, it says whenever materials are dropped more than 20 feet to any point lying outside the exterior walls of a building, you got to use an enclosed chute. All right. Next paragraph, when debris is dropped through holes in a floor without the use of chutes, the area onto which the material is dropped shall be completely enclosed with barricades not less than 42 inches high. The next paragraph says all scrap lumber and so forth shall be removed from the immediate work area as the work progresses. Disposal of waste material by burning shall comply with local fire regulations, and all solvent, oily rags, flammable liquids shall be kept in a fire-resistant covered container until removed from the job site. Lots of stuff there for you to comply with. Materials handling. Make sure that you tab that one about the dropping materials. You're going to want to. You'll be happy if you do that. In subpart I, once again, chapter I, we'll talk about tools, hand and power tools. The first thing I want you to highlight is paragraphs 300A and B. This is the first two things, the first two paragraphs in subpart I. All hand and power tools and similar equipment, whether furnished by the employer or an employee, shall be maintained in a safe condition. Next paragraph, guarding, in bold print. When power-operated tools are designed to accommodate guards, you better believe they shall be equipped with such guards. Let's go to section paragraph 300D. We're talking about switches. This is all D through D3. This is 3 paragraphs. You know, depending on the tool, there's a requirement for a particular switch. For instance, all 300D says all handheld powered plate and sanders, grinders with wheels 2-inch diameter or less, routers, planers, trimmers, nibblers, shears, scroll saws, and jigsaws with blade shanks 1/4 of an inch wide or less may be equipped only with a positive on-off control. That means you take your finger off of it, it's got to turn off. Your handheld power drills, your tappers, your fastener drivers, your horizontal, vertical, and angle grinders with greater than 2 inches in diameter, okay, disc sanders, belt sanders, reciprocating saws, saber saws, other similar operating tools, shall be equipped with a momentary contact on-off control and may have a lock-on control provided that the turn-off can be accomplished by a single motion of the same finger that turned it on. Okay, you're probably thinking about your tools right now. Sure, they probably comply to this. Next paragraph, all other handheld power tools like your circular saw, your chainsaw, your percussion tool without positive accessory holding means shall be equipped with a constant pressure switch that will shut off the power when the pressure is released. So there you go, a positive pressure switch. That's your skill saw, right? You can't set your skill saw to run continuously. Once you take your finger off of it, it's going to turn off. I hope so. Let's go to the next little section. We're talking about hand tools there. And paragraph 301C says, your impact tools like your drift pins, your wedges, and chisels, they shall be kept free of mushroomed heads. Are they describing all of your chisels in your toolbox? Yeah, kind of me too. Let's go to paragraph number 302A, electric power operated tools. Yeah, man, they got to be double insulated or grounded. So go ahead and highlight paragraph 302A and then drop down to paragraph 302B3. We're talking about using those air tools, the air guns. If they operate at more than 100 psi, there has to be a safety device on there that will keep it from ejecting fasteners unless it's against the work. Once again, 302B4 talks about compressed air for cleaning purposes. Guess what? You can't go over 30 psi max for cleaning purposes. And I tell you what, 30 psi doesn't clean much, but that's what it tells us. So on test day, that's what we're going to answer. I know out on the job site, you do something to get a little more air out of your tool to clean up, but on test day, it's 30 psi. Okay, let's go to 302E. and 3302E2. We're talking about powder actuated tools. Now this is not a misprint, and it's not a misprint when you're taking your test. It's not power actuated, it's powder actuated. These are those Hilti guns. Alright? We're told in 302E that only employees who have been trained in that operation shall be allowed to operate that powder actuated tool. I think that's a good idea, to tell you the truth. Next paragraph says the tool shall be tested each day, also before loading. Test that baby each day. Alright, let's go to paragraph 304. We're talking about some woodworking tools, and paragraph, it's actually paragraph B there, 304B, where it says speeds in bold print. That's what I want you to highlight. It says your operating speed has to be etched or otherwise permanently marked on your circular saw over 20 inches in diameter, or operating at 10,000 peripheral feet per minute. Alright, let's go to subpart J. Next chapter is going to tell us a little bit about welding and cutting, subpart J, and then we're going to hit paragraph 350A10 first of all. Oxygen cylinders and storage shall be separated from fuel gas cylinders or combustible materials a minimum distance of 20 feet, or by a non-combustible barrier 5 feet high and having a fire resistance rating of at least 1/2 hour. Let's go to paragraph 350D1. They talk about a term called cracking, and that basically says you got to pop that tank open a little bit. It says before a regulator to a cylinder is connected, the valve shall be opened slightly and closed immediately. This action is generally termed cracking. It's supposed to remove dust and dirt, that kind of thing. Let's drop down to 350E2, manifolds ventilated and accessible. 350E2, fuel gas and oxygen manifolds shall be placed in a safe, well ventilated, and in accessible locations. They shall not be located within an enclosed space. Alright, subpart K, electrical. Man, we're moving right along right now. We're going to go to paragraph 404B and 404B1II. They're right there together, and they're talking about branch circuits. First of all, okay, the employer shall use GFIs, right? The next one says, the next paragraph says, on all 120 volt single phase 15 and 20 amp outlets on the job site, they have to be GFI. We know that, but it's right there in writing for us. Let's drop down several paragraphs, and we're going to go to 404B1IIIC. It's kind of difficult to interpret that, but it's only, thank goodness, only about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs down from where we just highlighted. And this talks about your cords, and they have to be inspected every day. Let's drop about another 1, 2, 3, 4, about another 6 or 7 paragraphs, and we're talking about you're testing your cord sets every 3 months. And I'm not even going to try to say that one. You can just look up on the screen and you'll see where you can find that particular piece of information. We're going to talk about subpart L, scaffolds. The first thing in subpart L that we're going to see is a bunch of definitions. And I want you to highlight under paragraph 450B. Now 450B is a large paragraph because there's a lot of definitions in there. I want you to highlight the ones that you see on the screen there. I want you to see if you can find a boatswain's chair, understand what that is. A mason's, actually ladder jack is the next one. And a mason's multi-point adjustable suspension ladder, and your pump jack. Make sure that you can find all those 4 in your definitions. You may have to hit the pause button and look for those. They're in alphabetical order. Section 451 discusses the capacity. 451, it says A is capacity in bold print. Basically, your ladders, your scaffolding have to be able to support 4 times the maximum intended load, and itself, its own weight, and 4 times its maximum intended load. That's how strong your scaffolding has to be. Let's go about another half a dozen or so paragraphs down, and we'll see there's a discussion of walkboards. This is section 451 B1I. Walkboards need to have a maximum of a 1-inch space between them. And we're going to need to overlap walkboards from time to time, so we're going to go to section 451 B7, and then we're told that overlapping has to occur over supports and be 12-inch overlap minimum. You might want to take a minute and just hit the pause button and read that paragraph to yourself. Let's go to 451F6. This is a couple of pages forward, and in paragraph F6 there's a discussion. It's actually a table, but they don't call it a table. It tells you how far you have to be away from electrical lines with your scaffolding. They have one line that says it's 3 feet if it's less than 300 volts. It's 10 feet if it's 300 volts to 50 kilovolts, and so forth. You might even have to do a little math question if it's more than 50 kilovolts, because it's 10 feet plus 0.4 inches for every kilovolt over 50. So just keep in mind that's where you find that information. Let's go to fall protection. There you go. It's on that, should be on that same page or shortly thereafter. 451G, it's in bold print, it says fall protection. Each employee on a scaffolding more than 10 feet above a working level shall be protected from falling from that lower level. The reason I have this in red is because of the fact that when we get into the chapter about fall protection, it'll say 6 feet, and there is a difference for scaffolding. Scaffolding is 10 feet, but ordinary fall protection is 6 feet. So for instance, if you were building a porch and you had to put up a handrail to keep somebody from accidentally stepping off that porch, the requirement would be that you would need a handrail if they could fall more than 6 feet. Well, on scaffolding, you don't need the fall protection until the scaffolding is more than 10 feet above the lower level. The only reason I can think that that's the case is when you're working on scaffolding, hey, you know you got to be careful, right? So you're not going to need, they give you a little higher threshold there. Now, if you are going to build handrails or have handrails on that scaffolding, there is a requirement in this section here, 451 G4I, and I want you, there's 2 or 3 paragraphs that you can really read here. It's 451 G4II. It talks about the handrails being between 38 and 45 inches high, and that's the top edge. The next paragraph talks about mid rails, so take a minute and read that. And then the one after that talks about where you put the mid rail. So go ahead and kind of peruse. You might want to hit the pause button and read those 3 paragraphs right there. We'll jump over to 452K. 452K is in bold print. It says ladder jack scaffolds. Platforms shall not exceed a height of 20 feet on a ladder jack. Make sure you can find that. Let's go to, can you write on a scaffold or not? Well, you got to read about 3 or 4 paragraphs, actually more than that. About 5 paragraphs or so to know if you should write on scaffolding. You start out at 452W6. Employees shall not be allowed to write on scaffolds unless the following conditions exist. And then you've got to read paragraphs I, double I, triple I, Roman numeral 4 and Roman numeral 5. If those conditions exist, then guess what? Then somebody can ride on that scaffold and have themselves a good old time. We're still in subpart L. We're still talking about scaffolds, but we're going to go to the appendix. In this case, the appendix isn't too far away. You probably have to turn 1 or 2 pages, and you'll find Appendix A. There is a section that's numbered 1, and it says General Guidelines and Tables. And then in that section, there will be a table. It's not labeled as a table, but it is a table. Just above that table, it talks about using a 2x10 nominal or a 2x10 rough. Well, let's think about these for a minute. How thick of a walkboard is a 2x10 nominal? Well, it's only 1.5 inches thick, right? So it's going to not span as far. A 2x9 rough is supposedly a full 2 inches thick, so it will actually span farther than a 2x10. Now, somebody might ask you at some point in the future that they may say you're going to put 50 pounds per square foot on your scaffolding, and if you're using a rough cut board, that table will tell us that you can span 8 feet. Now, if you're using a nominal 2x10, which is only 1.5 inches thick, you're only going to be able to span 6 feet. Be able to find that table. You'll have a smile on your face if you can. All right. We're going to still be in subpart L, and we're going to look at, we're still in that same section. We're still in the general guidelines and tables. So you don't have to go too far to find this answer. You don't have to go too far to find this answer. But it is a little bit hard to find. So see if you can find paragraph. It's under the note. It's about 2 or 3 inches under the note. It's in bold print. And it's paragraph III. It's actually paragraph DIII. There's a discussion of your screen that you're going to put between your toe boards and your mid rails. And we're told there, first of all, it shall be equivalent. Your toe board has to be equivalent in strength to a 1 inch by 4 inch lumber. And then paragraph F says that your screens installed have to be between the toe boards and the mid rails have to be number 18 gauge US standard wire 1 inch mesh. So this toe board information and the wire mesh information is all under the note. Once again, we're in general guidelines and tables, note, and then it's paragraph D, and then highlight your triple I, your Roman numeral triple I, that's about your toe boards, and then you have the screen, which is paragraph F, and that's that one US standard wire 1 inch mesh. We're going to flip over to where they're talking about. Oh, by the way, that's we're going to flip over to where they're talking about your pump jack scaffold. That's just a couple of pages towards the back. We're still in Appendix A, but we're in a Part 2 called Specific Guidelines and Tables. And I want you to find a paragraph J where they're talking about pump jack scaffolds. Especially you roofers, you better be able to find this one, that your pump jack scaffold, you can only put 500 pounds between the poles. And your ladder jack scaffolds, that's paragraph K, is 25 pounds per square foot. Man, there's a lot of rules to follow. In subpart M, we're talking about fall protection. I told you when we were talking about scaffolds, we were going to see some things in the fall protection. And the first thing I want you to see is there's some definitions probably on that first page of the fall protection chapter. That's chapter or subpart M as they call it. And I want you to find the definition of a hole. A hole is a gap or a void 2 inches or more in its least dimension. Let's go to 501B1, unprotected sides and edges. Each employee on a walkway working surface with an unprotected side or edge, which is 6 feet or more above a lower level, shall be protected from falling. Now, I just mentioned that in scaffolding what the difference was. So make sure that you know if it's scaffolding is 10 feet, otherwise fall protection is 6 feet. Let's go to your guardrails. How tall do the guardrails have to be? That's paragraph 502B1. Your top edge height of a top rail, okay, has to be 42 inches plus or minus 3. This was slightly different than scaffolding, so make sure that you understand that and answer it the way they want you to on the test. There's also something about D-rings. If we flip a page or so, it'll be paragraph 502E6. A D-ring or a snap hook shall be proof tested to a minimum tensile load of 3,600 pounds without cracking, breaking, or taking permanent deformation. How about that retraining? Let's flip a page and it'll say section 503C, retraining. When an employer has reason to believe that any affected employee who's already been trained does not have the understanding and skill required, the employer shall, you got it, retrain that employee. Next subpart is subpart N. We're going to be talking about some cranes, some derricks, some hoists, some elevators, and so forth. Now, it has been my experience by teaching classes that some people have come to class with a OSHA manual that for some reason has this information in a different chapter. So if you can't find subpart N and find section 550 right away, A4, and highlight along with me, then what I want you to do is go towards the back of your book and find chapter or subpart DD. And you should find the information you need there. If not, look for cranes and derricks in your index, and you will be able to follow along once you find the information about cranes, derricks, hoists, elevators, and conveyors. This is the only chapter that doesn't, where they put some information in a different place. You should have the same paragraph numbers, but for some reason it's in a different chapter. So see if you can find it. If you have trouble with it, you can always give us a call. Let's go to section 550A4 once again, and we're told that the hand signals shall be posted at the job site. In paragraph 550A15, and this would be A15I and II, there's a discussion of how far away you need to be from a power line. And it talks about lower than 50 kilovolt being 10 feet, and then if they're over 50 feet, 50 kilovolts, there might be a calculation you have to do. Okay, let's go. We'll flip over a few pages, and we're going to find this paragraph 550G7II. Now, I know it's going to be tough to find that. That's a mouthful right there. But see if you can find it, because it talks about travel being done with a rubber tire crane. And it talks about a 50% reduction of the rated capacity. I don't know what that means right there. I guess that means if you're using a rubber tire crane, then you're going to only be able to pick up half of what that crane is without rubber tires would be able to. So keep that in mind. The only other thing that I have in this book, and I don't even know, yeah I do, it's on here. If you flip a page, probably see if you could find 550C15. In the middle of that paragraph, we're told that all hoists should be inspected and tested every 3 months. So there you go. That is a lot. Subpart N is all about cranes, derricks, hoists, elevators, and conveyors. We're going to be in subpart O, where we're talking about motor vehicles, mechanized equipment, and marine operations. I tell you what, you underground guys and you marine operators, you better be paying attention to this one. General builder residential as well, but especially underground and marine contractors. Okay, the first thing we're going to see is in section 601B, general requirements. I would read all the way through B, all the way through B6. This is about 6 paragraphs, of course, that you're going to have to highlight. It talks about parking brake systems, it talks about tail lights, it talks about having a backup audible alarm that says no employer in paragraph 4 shall use the motor vehicle having an unobstructed view to the rear unless the vehicle has a reverse system, or paragraph II, the vehicle is backed up only when observer signals it's safe to do so. You've got B5, which says all vehicles with cabs shall be equipped with windshields and power wipers. Cracked and broken glass shall be replaced. And B6, this is the last one I want you to highlight, all haulage vehicles whose payload is loaded by means of a crane, power shovel, or other civil equipment have to have a cab shield and a canopy adequate to protect the operator from shifting or falling materials. So take a minute and read all that. Read it word for word. Hit the pause button. Spend some time there. This is important, guys. This is important. Let's go. 602A2 through A2II. They're talking about seat belts. Once again, read 2 or 3 paragraphs. You got to have it on all equipment and so forth. It says the next paragraph, seat belts shall not be provided for equipment which is designed only for stand-up operation. Well, isn't that nice? And then the next one says you don't have to have seat belts. This is III here. This is actually a paragraph that I don't have on the screen, but you're going to want III. A2 III. Seat belts need not be provided for equipment which does not have rollover protection or adequate canopy protection. So make sure you can find that. They don't want you strapped into a machine that's going to roll over on you and you can't get away from it. If it doesn't have rollover protection, you don't actually have to have a seat belt. All right, that's it in the subpart O, motor vehicles, mechanized equipment, and marine operations. Before we get completely out of subpart O, though, I do want to point something out for you marine contractors. If you're taking the marine contracting test, you need to find section 603 where it talks about pile driving equipment. I'd read that whole section. I'd highlight that whole section. Make sure you have this highlighted. And at the bottom, the next page, section 605 specifically talks about marine operations and equipment. I would read that whole thing, and I would also make sure that you can find what they call a Jacob's ladder. This is for marine contractors especially. There we go. Now we're done with subpart A. The next thing we're going to do is talk about subpart P, probably the most important chapter for safety reasons with regard to general contractors, building, residential contractors, and your underground guys, possibly your marine contractors as well. Of course, your roofers aren't going to be too crazy about keeping up with subpart P, but it's worth all of us taking a look at it. Subpart P, once again, is about excavations. The first thing I want to highlight is 651C2. 651C2. Means of egress from trench excavations. A stairway, ladder, ramp, or other means of egress shall be located in trench excavations 4 feet or more in depth. Alright, I've got that highlighted in red because you need a means of egress if it's 4 feet or more in depth. Okay, as to require no more than 25 feet of lateral travel. Well, how far apart do you need to put your ladders then? Well, you got to think about this. You got to put your ladders every 50 feet maximum, because if you have a person in between 2 of those ladders, that would mean they would only have to travel 25 feet. So for instance, if somebody asked you someday, say, look, my trench is 300 feet long, how many ladders do I need? Well, all you have to do is divide by 50, and the answer would be 6. Think about that. You might want to take a minute and read that. Let's go to 651 G1I, where oxygen deficiency in atmospheres containing less than 19.5%, okay, could exist or reasonably expected to exist. Guess what? You have to test it if it's if it's more than 4 feet in depth. So go ahead and take a minute and read that paragraph as well. 651J2. Okay, employees shall be protected from excavated or other materials that could pose a hazard by falling into a trench by keeping them away at least 2 feet from the edge. Even to me, that sounds a little bit a little bit close. Now, I don't have it up on the screen, but I also want you to highlight the next paragraph, 651K, where they're talking about inspections. How often do you have to inspect an excavation? You better believe it. There it is, daily. Okay, let's go to 652. We're going to go A through B2. There's several paragraphs here that I want you to read and understand. It says in paragraph A that each employee in an excavation shall be protected from cave-ins by an adequate protective system designed in accordance with paragraph B or C of this section when the excavations are made entirely of stable rock, or this is except when. So you're going to have to bench and slope and protect employees except when the excavations are made entirely in rock, or stable rock, that is. Excavations are less than 5 feet. Now that's also in your contractor's manual, and that's why I highlighted the 4 feet for the means of egress. It's the 5 feet for your benching and your sloping and your cave-in protection. All right. Protective systems shall have the capacity to resist without failure all loads that are intended or could reasonably be expected to be applied or transmitted to them. And then 652B says the slopes and configurations of sloping and benching systems shall be selected and constructed by the employer or his designee and shall be in accordance with the requirements of paragraph B1, or in the alternative B2 or B3 or B4 as follows. And you can read those if you like, but I'm going to be discussing that in detail in just a minute. Option 1, I will read, B1, allowable configurations and slopes. Excavations shall be sloped at an angle of not steeper than 1.5 horizontal to 1 vertical, okay, unless the employer uses another option. So you can just assume everything is what they call a type C soil, and you do your sloping that way. And that'll become clearer here in just a minute. We'll talk about a type A, a type B, and a type C soil in just a minute. But before we do that, I do want you to highlight on 652G2, and this is when you're excavating below a protective shield, and you can go 2 feet. So make sure that you can find that in that paragraph. Now we're going to talk about type A and type B and type C soil for a few minutes. It says under Appendix A, now this is in Appendix A, and that should be right after what you just highlighted. It says in Appendix A, as you go down just about a full column, that type A is a cohesive soil with an unconfined compressive strength of 1.5 tons per square foot or greater. Type B is less than 1.5 tons but greater than 0.5 ton, and type C is less than 0.5 ton per square foot. So that gives you an idea of what A, B, and C are, and we're going to deal with those here in just a minute. Let's drop down to paragraph 4. This will be about another 7 or 8 paragraphs down. If you're in a layered system, the system shall be classified in accordance with its weakest layer. However, each layer can be classified individually, where a more stable layer lies under a less stable area. Then you can do each one individually. If you think about it, that makes sense. We're going to see some diagrams here in a minute. Now, we're still in Appendix A, and I want you to find paragraph 2I. Paragraph 2 talks about manual tests, and paragraph I talks about the plasticity test. Well, what is it? It says you mold a moist or wet sample of soil into a ball. You attempt to roll it into threads as thin as 1/8 of an inch. We're told our cohesive soil can be successfully rolled into threads without crumbling. All right. And then you have something called the thumb penetration test. Basically, it says you stick your thumb into the soil. Take a minute and read that paragraph. It's kind of almost amusing. Well, now we're going to go to table B1. All right, we're in Appendix B now. So we're in the back of subpart P, or chapter P, which is all about excavations, and we're going to be in appendix B, and we're going to talk about sloping and benching. Table B1 discusses your type A, your type B, and your type C soil. If you look at all these diagrams there, you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. You have to bench, you have to slope these excavations if you're not using a trench shield, because you don't want them to cave in. Now that type A soil that we told had a pretty high compressive strength, we can slope that at a 3/4 to 1. And that's also 53 degrees. Well, what does that mean? That means for every foot that you go deep, you have to go 3/4 of a foot horizontally. So how far horizontally would you have to go if you were going 10 feet deep? Well, if you said, you might want to hit the pause button here because I'm getting ready to give you the answer. If you said 7.5, you got it right, because 7.5 is 3/4 of 10. So a 10-foot deep trench or pit in type A soil, you would have to go horizontally 7.5 feet to meet OSHA guidelines, or use a trench shield, of course. Now, I want you to remember the first number in the ratio is always the horizontal distance. The second number in the ratio is always the vertical measurement. So make sure that if you can remember that, that'll go a long way towards helping you on the test. Type B is a 1-to-1. That's 45 degrees. What does that mean? Well, how far out would you have to go? How far horizontally would you have to go if you went 10 feet deep? Well, sure, it should be 10 feet horizontally if you go 10 feet vertically. And then you have a type C soil, which is 1.5 to 1. That's what I was saying earlier, where it said you could do 1.5 to 1 on any type of soil. So because that's the safest. So you're just assuming it's the most unstable type of soil. Type C is 1.5 to 1. So for every foot that you go deep, you have to go 1.5 feet out. So in that same 10-foot deep pit, you would have to go 15 feet horizontally to meet OSHA requirements. One of the last things that we're going to address in subpart P is hydraulic shoring. So aluminum hydraulic shoring. This is probably going to be for the underground guys. And if you look, there's some tables. There's actually table, it's in appendix D of subpart P, table D1 through 1.1 through 1.4. Make sure that you understand table 1.1 is about vertical shores for a type A. Table 1.2 is about vertical shores for a type B. And table 1.3 is whaler systems for a type B. Next page, well, it's in the next page in my book, but see if you can find table 1.4. This is a whaler system for a type C. So let's see how we could read this. Let's say that on the left-hand column, the depth of our trench was 12 feet. All right, that means the vertical spacing of our whales has to be 4 feet. And let's take a look at the width of our trench. If the width of our trench was, say, 5 feet, that would be up to 8 feet. That means our horizontal spacing could vary according to our section modulus, which is what they'll give us. They'll tell us what the section modulus is, and we'll have to determine what the horizontal spacing or the cylinder diameter would have to be. So I know that you may not know what section modulus means and what have you, but the basic thing that you have to know to pass the test is if they talk about aluminum hydraulic shoring, you find the appropriate table in the back of the excavation chapter and answer it like they want you to on the test question. Let's talk about subpart Q, concrete and masonry construction, 1926-702 B is we're going to start highlighting where we're talking about concrete mixers. 702B, concrete mixers with 1 cubic yard or larger loading skip shall be equipped with a mechanical device to clear the skip of materials and guardrails installed on each side of the skip. As we drop down about 4 paragraphs in 702E, we're going to see about concrete pumping systems. That's 702E, and on 702E2, compressed air hoses used on concrete pumping systems shall be provided with a positive fail-safe joint connector to prevent separation of sections when pressurized. Still talking about concrete, we're going to talk about precast in section 704, and we'll highlight paragraphs B through D. 704B says your lifting inserts have to be able, if it's anything other than tilt-up, they have to be capable of supporting at least 2 times the maximum intended load. Lifting inserts which are embedded or otherwise attached to tilt-up shall... Actually, this is tilt-up. I apologize. Lifting inserts which are embedded or otherwise attached to tilt-up shall be capable of supporting at least 2 times the maximum intended load. So this is tilt-up. Lifting inserts which are building or otherwise attached to precast other than tilt-up shall be capable of supporting 4 times the maximum intended load. And then paragraph D says lifting hardware shall be capable of supporting at least 5 times the maximum intended load. The hardware itself has to be able to withstand 5 times. Lots of stuff there. You know, there's something called lift slab operations. I've talked to very few people who have done this, but I've talked to a few. It's basically how you, like on a multi-story project, you would pour the slab at ground level and then jack it up into place. Kind of an interesting concept. 705A says lift slab operations shall be designed and planned by a registered professional engineer that has experience in that. Yeah, I'll say. And then we're going to highlight several paragraphs. We're going to go to paragraph G, which says that during the jacking operations, everything's got to be kept within 1/2 of an inch of level. Paragraph H says that a device has, if leveling is done automatically, the device is installed that'll stop the operation when the 1/2 inch tolerance is met. Paragraph J says the maximum number of manually controlled jacks cannot exceed 14. The number 14 is very important for you to be able to find. Now let's talk about masonry. 706A2, a limited access zone shall be equal to the height of the wall to be constructed plus 4 feet and shall run the entire length of the wall. Subpart R is about steel erection, and we're going to go first of all to section 757, where OSHA addresses open web steel joists. 757A1 III. Hoisting cables shall not be released until the seat at each end of the steel joist is field bolted. 757B, attachment of steel joists and steel girders. Each end of a K-series steel joist shall be attached to the support structure with a minimum of 2 1/8-inch fillet welds, 1 inch long, or with 2 1/2-inch bolts or the equivalent. Let's flip over to systems engineered metal buildings. This is section 758, and I want you to find paragraph C. Remember, this is specifically for systems engineered metal buildings. Paragraph 758C. Rigid frames shall have 50% of their bolts, or the number of bolts specified by the manufacturer, whichever is greater, installed and tightened on both sides of the web adjacent to the flange before the hoisting equipment is released. There you go. That's subpart R. Steel erection. Okay, let's push on through to the end of the book. We're getting close here. We're going to highlight a little bit in the demolition chapter, not much. We're going to talk about chutes here on section 1926-852, and I want you to highlight paragraph B. All materials, chutes, or sections thereof at an angle of more than 45 degrees from horizontal shall be entirely enclosed. There you go. Once again, there's more information about demolition, about chutes, and in the materials handling subpart. So be aware of that. You may need to go there for the answers. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to skip a paragraph or two, a chapter or two, and we're going to go to stairways and ladders. This is going to be real important for all of us to know. It's going to be especially important for roofers as well. Roofers are going to have to answer questions about ladders, I can guarantee you. General builder and residential, very possible as well. Let's talk about subpart X. This is chapter X, stairways and ladders, section 1051, paragraph A. A stairway or ladder shall be provided at all personnel points of access where there is a break in elevation of 19 inches or more. Can't expect them to step up more than 19 inches. Okay. Let's go to 1053A1I, maximum intended load. Each self-supporting ladder, what does that mean? Well, that just means a step ladder, right? Each self-supporting ladder has to be able to support 4 times the maximum intended load. Unless it's extra heavy duty, it could be metal or plastic, heavy duty for 3.3 times the maximum intended load. Let's go to stairways and ladders 1053A3 triple I, rung spacing. It tells us that the base section of an extension trestle ladder shall not be less than 8 inches or more than 18 inches apart as measured between the center lines. So it's measured from the center lines, and it talks about an extension ladder. Believe it or not, the base section of an extension ladder can be different than the extension part of the extension ladder. And read that whole paragraph and get familiar with that. Let's go to fixed ladders. We're going to be in 1053 A17 and A18. We're talking about fixed ladders without cages or wells. This whole section right here, this whole next several paragraphs, probably a dozen paragraphs or so, is all about your fixed ladders and the cages and wells around them. A fixed ladder without a cage or a well, all right, has to have a clear width to the nearest permanent object of at least 15 inches. Those fixed ladders that are provided with cages and wells, okay, they have to have a cage or well if they're 24 feet in height. There you go. Or if you could actually, if the ground level is 24 feet from the top of the ladder. Read those couple of paragraphs carefully. Jump up, and I've got them all on the screen here. I've got A17, I've got A18, 20 V is at the top. Well, several paragraphs hence anyway. Horizontal bands shall be spaced not more than 4 feet on center vertically. Well, I guess that's the horizontal bands of the cage. And then go to paragraph number 4, and it'll say the inside clear width shall be at least 30 inches of that cage or well. On subpart X, steel stairways and ladder, we're talking about a non-self-supporting ladder on 1053B5I. When a portable ladder is used for access to an upper landing surface, the side rails have to be at least 3 feet above the upper landing surface. Drop down a few paragraphs, and it says, it talks about the angle. 1053 1053B5I says that you have to have a 4-to-1 ratio. It has to be a 4-to-1 ratio. Basically what you do is you measure how high the building is. Say it's a 20-foot building, you divide that by 4, and that means the bottom of your ladder has to be 5 feet away from the building. So that's a 4-to-1 ratio and 3 feet above the building. So make sure that you have 1053 B1 and 1053 B5I, both of those highlighted. I may not have had B1 on the screen. No, I didn't. So make sure that you have B1, 1053 B1, 3 feet above the upper landing surface, and 1053 B5I, that one is on the screen. That's a 4-to-1 ratio for the angle of your ladder. Let's go to 1053 B16, portable ladders with structural defects or broken, missing rungs, and so forth have to be labeled do not use or remove from service. Let's go to, oh, there it is. There's the 3 feet above the upper landing surface. It just got put in the wrong place. There you go. So there's your 3 feet above the upper landing surface. There's your defective shall be marked. And then we're going to go to subpart Z. Okay, we're going to be in subpart Z, toxic, hazardous, and substances. This will be the last chapter that we take a look at. The main thing they talk about in here is asbestos, asbestos-containing materials. So we're going to be in 1101 C2. See if you can find 1101 C2, probably in the second page of subpart Z. It says excursion limit. The employer shall ensure that no employee is exposed to an airborne concentration of asbestos in excess of 1 fiber per cubic centimeter of air, averaged over a sampling period of 30 minutes, as it says. So be aware of that. Now you're going to go about, you're going to go several pages towards the back of the book, 3 or 4 probably, and then you'll find 1101J. This is going to be hard to find for you, but it's important. So it is in bold print, so I put it in bold print on the screen as well. It's 1101J, and then I want you to, I've got about 3 paragraphs that I want you to make sure that you can find. This is all about your asbestos work area. And it says requirements for employees performing Class 1 asbestos jobs involving over 25 linear or 10 square feet. It says you have to have a decontamination area. The employee shall establish a decontamination area that is adjacent and connected to the regulated area for the decontamination of such employees. The decontamination area shall consist of an equipment room, a shower area, and a clean room in series. So you got to have them all 3 there in a row. Equipment room, shower room, clean room in series. The employer shall ensure that employees enter and exit the regulated area through the decontamination area. The equipment room tells you about the equipment room, it tells you about the shower area, and so forth. And then even a few paragraphs down, it'll tell you about that clean change room. Okay, there you go. So just make sure that I would start at 1101J and I'd read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 paragraphs all the way through clean change room. All right. Now there's some training involved. You'll probably have to flip over 1 page and find 1101K9 through 1101K9 paragraph Roman numeral 4. Talks about 8 hours of hands-on training. So I would read, it says training, it says employee information and training, that's K9. Employer shall train each employee who is likely to be exposed in excess of a permissible exposure limit. Each employee performs Class 1 through Class 4 and so forth. Next paragraph, training shall be provided prior to or at the time of initial assignment. Training for Class 1 operations or for Class 2 require the use of critical barriers. And then it also talks about, as you go down to paragraph 9.4a, this is very important, it's not on the screen, so make sure you can find it. 9.4 is on the screen, but I want you to find 9.4a. The last sentence says, such course shall include hands-on training, and it has to be 8 hours. There you go. So I would start at paragraph K9 and read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs. That would end up at where it talks about the 8 hours of hands-on. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the index, and it's in big print. Why is it in big print? It is probably the most important part of the book for you. It's going to help you find what you need to. Here's going to be the scenario. The question is going to be fairly obvious. It's a safety question. You're going to know you're in this book. You're going to go to the index and you're going to find it. And by the way, the index not only has page numbers, but it has paragraph numbers too. I would use those because when you get to a page number, there's a lot of stuff on that daggone page. Those paragraph numbers will help you out as well. So that's the OSHA book. Good luck with it, and you should be able, now that you're familiar with it, you shouldn't have any problem with a safety question.